I've had a couple of customers in this week asking about a provisional cast-on, and there are a number of different ways you can do provisional cast-ons. So I thought I'd show what I think is sort of the quickest and easiest way to do a provisional cast-on, and that's using a crochet hook and a contrasting scrap of yarn. When might you use a provisional cast-on? Well, there are a couple of situations that I tend to use them in. In this popular hat pattern where you first, oops, see if you can even see it in this frame I'm working. This is a really popular, I think it's a Fiber Trends pattern, and what you do is you cast on and you knit this section first, and you knit it flat from one end to the other, and then you need to put a seam in where the two ends meet, and then what you do is you go around to the top and pick up your stitches and knit into the center. I actually didn't knit this hat. My sister knit this one for a store model, so I don't. It doesn't look like she did a provisional cast on, but this is a situation where I would do a provisional cast on. I'd knit the panel that it's called, that it asks me to, and then at the end, instead of binding off and then seaming, I would leave my live stitches at the end. I'd go back, I'd rip out my provisional stitch at provisional cast on the front set of stitches. So I then would have two sets of live stitches, just like you do if you're a sock knitter and you're familiar with the Kitchener stitch for the toes, for closing the toes. That's a nice neat way of doing it. That's what I would do here. Another time or occasion in which you might choose to do a provisional cast on is if you're doing a lot of multicolor work. Sometimes it's hard when you're working in a Fair Isle or multicolor pattern. It's nice to sort of knit the sweater first and then decide what colors you want to work into the ribbing. And so I know my sister does this a lot, and I've done it on a couple of occasions. I will do a provisional cast on above the ribbing and just work the whole sweater. And then once I've got, you know, all this color work done, and I can then decide, you know, what colors from the fabric I want to accentuate or use in my ribbing, then I pull out the provisional cast on and then work the ribbing in from the top down in the other direction. So that's another situation in which case a provisional cast on is a common thing for me to use, even if the pattern doesn't ask me to use it. And then there are a lot of patterns in which case they'll say use a provisional cast on, and most patterns will give you an idea of how to do a provisional cast on. But like I said, there are a number of different ways of doing provisional cast ons, and I happen to just think the crochet provisional cast on is really simple. So that's what I'm going to show you here. So the first thing I do is start with a slip knot, just like you start to cast on for knitting, or how you would start to crochet, the slip knot over your crochet hook. And I would choose to use a contrasting yarn that's of a similar gauge and a crochet hook that is similar in size to the size knitting needles that you require for the project. And then you're going to chain one stitch more than your pattern asks you to cast on. So if your pattern asks you to do a provisional cast on of 100 stitches, you're going to chain 101. And you're just doing the simple chain stitch, which for those of you who don't crochet is simply to wrap the yarn around the hook, and whether you grab it this way or wrap around as I do, just because I find it easier to pull through the loop this way. So you wrap the yarn around the hook and you pull through your slip stitch or the newest stitch you've created. Wrap, grab, and pull it through. Wrap, grab, and pull it through. That's just a simple chain stitch. So again, you cast on one stitch more than your pattern calls for. Then you break your contrast yarn off and pull that last loop through just to secure it for now. But don't pull it really tightly, because in the end you're going to have to undo it. Then what you're going to do is take the yarn that you're actually casting on for your project, and you're going to pick up the bump on the back side of that chain. So if you look carefully or closely at the chain you've just created, one side is flat and actually looks like a knit stitch, and the other side has this bump that kind of looks like a purl bump on the back side of it. And what you're going to do is actually go through and pick up and knit through each of those purl bumps. All right, so we've cast on one stitch more than we actually want to cast on, and that's because at the very end of our crocheted chain, we pulled the waste yarn through that last loop just to hold it, to keep it from unraveling temporarily. So you do not want to pick up a stitch through that very last bump. So you're going to start one chain over from the end of your chain, and you're going to insert your needle through that back purl bump, and then you're going to take the yarn that you're actually knitting your project with, and you're going to just hook it over the needle at this point and pull that stitch up. And then you're going to find your next purl bump on the back side of your chain. You're going to insert your knitting needle through it. Let me just get the tails here out of the way. Wrap your yarn around the needle and pull it up through the chain. And then go into the next purl bump, wrap, and pick up the stitch. Go into the next purl bump, wrap, pick up your stitch. You can just see how quick and easy this method is. It's very fast to crochet your chain, and it's very fast to then go down the back side of purl bumps and just pick up your stitches. And if you start one up from the end, given that you've crocheted a chain of one stitch more than you needed to cast on, you will just proceed to the end of the chain here. And let me just reorient this so you can see what I have on the needle are the yarn. So what I have on the needle is the yarn that we're going to be knitting our project with, and along the bottom of the needle you can see your crocheted chain in the contrast color. And you're just going to work your project now as the pattern calls for, and then at the end, when it asks you to remove your provisional cast on, which is this red. Okay, so then once you've finished knitting your fabric and it asks you to go back and remove your provisional cast on so that you can pick up the stitches and knit in the other direction or graft, depending upon what your pattern calls for, you will go back to that one extra stitch that you chained that we did not pick up through, and you're going to undo that little knot at the end of your chain, and then you can see how simple and easy it is to now pull this chain out, and what it leaves behind, I should do it from this side, as I pull this out, are the live stitches. And if you're uncomfortable just pulling and then picking the stitches up, you can, pick your stitches up as you pull the chain stitch on. And now you are at the point where your pattern may ask you to now knit in the other direction, or to Kitchener stitch this set of live stitches to another set of live stitches. That's how simple and easy it is. All you have to remember is pick a yarn and a crochet hook similar in size to both the knitting needles and yarn that you're going to be knitting with. Chain one stitch more than your pattern asks you to cast on. And then when you pick up the stitches, just remember to pick up through the back loop. Don't pick up through the front flat side of the chain, but pick up that back purl bump. And you'll have a very easy time of just unraveling this provisional cast on when you need to.